I would like to start by welcoming you to the Irvine Valley College Global Policy Forum. Hello, my name is Theo Hunt and I will be your host for this evening. We have 4 presentations that I hope you will find entertaining and enlightening, but I'd like to warn you that some of these topics might be slightly controversial, and I'll ask you to keep an open mind. While creating our presentations, we try to look at our topics both logically and philosophically with the goal of challenging some basic ideas that we don't usually consider. We as students live a life of repetition. We go to school, we go to church, and then hopefully we graduate and start our adult lives. Tonight we're going to look at 4 topics from a different perspective. We want to evoke some thought on the basic decisions we make every day regarding national defense, religion, education, and our health. The first topic is based on an unspoken compromise we make with society about our education. It's a fair argument that if we enroll in a good college, we should have good jobs. Here to talk more about that is Max Hyman.
Since grade school, we've all been told that in order to get a good job, we need to get a good education. But what does that mean? We are led to believe that a good education means that we get a degree from a good school, and the better the school we go to, the better degree we get. But is this really the case? How many of us are spending most of our days trying to get good grades so we can transfer to a good school, like UCLA, UC Berkeley, or Stanford, so we can get a good job and make a lot of money? The problem is we have thought this for so long. Without question, how do we know this is true? Let's think about this. How many of us have friends who graduated from college and are struggling to find good jobs? I have a friend who graduated and is now a custodian at Disneyland. I have another friend who transferred from IBC, graduated from Berkeley, and is now an intern with about $20,000 of debt. I think we need to realize that just because we have an education, it doesn't mean we are going to get good jobs. Maybe in previous generations when degrees were harder to come by, but in our generation, everyone is going to have a degree. So what's going to set us apart? Who told us that a degree was going to get us a good job anyway? Our parents? Who told them? How much money are big schools making off students who are getting rich off their poor parents' students' dime? How many students are struggling or still living with their parents just to barely afford college? How many people need to borrow money or even ask parents to help to go to college? Better question. How many legal adults, 18 years of age or older, are still completely dependent on their parents just to be able to go to college because they feel they have to? Okay, I agree. I don't want to be dumb. I want to be smart. But do you think that most people are in college because they want to be smart? Or do you think that most people are in school because they feel they have to? And why do you think they feel they have to? I started looking at the average income of the college graduates in the United States of America and found that it is $46,000 a year. That doesn't sound too great, so I looked at the jobs to see which are making the most money for the top jobs. IT specialist, $70,000. Program analyst, $68,000. Then it's civil engineer and management analysis for around the top for number 5. These statistics were calculated based off the salary calculator, which uses current job listing indexed by an engine, also after pre-tax dollars. My next step is to look at what these top-paying jobs are asking for requirements, so I checked different jobs. Out of the 3 quick searches for the average highest income jobs in the United States, only 1 required an associate's degree, which begs the question, what are we doing? What are we working for? Let's ask a more interesting question. What are professors making at the schools that we are working so hard to get to? Harvard, full-time professors, $198,000. Columbia, full professors, $197,000. Stanford, full-time professor, $195,000. Then you have Princeton, New York, Penn, and Yale, all in the $180,000 range. Another fun fact, I did the math, and the average student to faculty ratio for these schools is 7.25 to 1. When I have some time, I might paint a picture of 7 students on their knees, looking up to a city of skyscrapers where the buildings are Harvard, Columbia, and Stanford. Maybe some fat professors with money falling out of their pockets will be sticking out the windows. If you read any of this silly rant, let it be this. I'm sure I ran the numbers of deans, other schools, officials, and other people I haven't even considered yet. But I bet we would see how education has become a grossly misused tool for profit, a business of sorts, that we are all paying for. I am not saying these professors don't deserve $200,000 at the struggling student's expense, and that David Beckham deserves $250 million for 5 years of playing soccer. I'm just saying that we need to look at the most obvious things that don't raise the question, and we need to challenge them. We need to look at these things as a struggle for power, and we need to start looking at these relationships.
Thank you, Max. Now to speak about medicine and the health we take for granted is Jabron Samla.
You should be blessed that you are able to go to sleep every night and wake up the next day. Don't take life for granted. Appreciate it. Secretary of State William S. Howard stated that in 1866. Hello everyone, my name is Jabron Samla, and I'm going to be talking about how we take our lives for granted. I'm going to list a simple item on our agenda which relates to the ideology of taking lives for granted. I am going to be talking about modern day medicines. Now, the leading theory suggests that modern medicines originated from primitive men learning about injuries, accidents, and animal bites. Little by little, these experiences formed into useful knowledge, and through experience in nature, men learned the relationship between cause and effect. Men started tracking which eating habits were effective against fighting illnesses, and new observations were formed in the field of medicines. If you track every primitive society, you will find that each one of them had some kind of healing art. Now, as those societies grew, the healing art grew, and that became the part of our society. According to U.S. Census, the average life expectancy of someone who was born in 1990 was 75. By 2020, the projected life expectancy is 79 and a half. Now that is a huge jump from what life expectancy used to be. According to the studies done by University of California, Berkeley, the average expectancy of someone living in the United States of America in 1913 was 50 years old. So basically, in the last 100 years, we have gained 25 years of life due to the expansion of our modern medicines, which by all means is nothing short of incredible. Now the problem is that during the last 100 years, a lot has changed obviously, and negative practices have become standard in the United States of America. The Center of Disease Control and Prevention has recorded that 1/3 of US citizens and adults are obese. In 2008, medical costs associated with obesity were estimated at $147 billion, and medical costs for people who are obese were $1,429 more than the people who weigh normal. $147 billion. Now that's the figure that should really be considered by US. There's a lot of money going towards evaluation, surgeries, and medication. The US Department of Health reported that obesity is the second leading cause of preventing deaths in the United States of America, which means it is preventable. Obesity is preventable. Spending billions of dollars is preventable. Having a life dependent on medication is preventable. We have basically allowed ourselves as a nation to become lazy and take our own bodies and to an extent the qualities of our life for granted. So basically my point is that it's ridiculous how Americans have let it get worse. We all have family members who are dependent on medications to keep their blood sugar stable, cholesterol down, and even plaque from building in their arteries. It's sad because we don't take care of ourselves, but we let medicines do our job. And who are we giving our lives to? The power that we have. We are giving it to doctors and surgeons. They control our lives right now. They tell us what medicines to take. They tell us what surgeries to get. And here's an interesting fact, that we don't even question the authority. We basically say, okay, you are the doctor, you know better than me, and I will do whatever you want me to do. Here's the switch of my life. Tell me when to turn it on and when to turn it off. When the real answer is that we should be taking responsibility and we should be taking care of our own selves. The money spent by the United States of America on modern day medicines, as I stated earlier, is almost $150 billion, which is obviously more than a lot of countries' GDP. That's ridiculous right now. Decision is in your hands. Your own future, your child's future. This disease could be prevented. The amount of money spent could be prevented. Now is the time to act. As of February 2013, we are in a $16 trillion debt. We are at a breaking point with 8% of unemployment rate. So let's all agree today that we are going to exercise and take care of our own selves and prevent all this money spent on irregular causes, and we are going to shift away from dependency. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jabron. Now David will speak about religion.
Thank you, everybody. My name is David Sadakane, and my presentation will be on the relativity of religion. I would like to set the context of my presentation with a question that has perplexed even the greatest scholars throughout history. What defines human nature? For instance, what is it that makes us a species unique from others? We are born, we eat, we sleep, we grow, and we eventually die. And that's not much unlike other animals. Perhaps some may believe that what separates us from other lesser creatures is our ability to think, or feel emotions, and even have desires. But that behavior has been shown in other mammalian creatures as well. Then what is it, if anything, that separates Homo sapiens sapien from the rest of the animal kingdom if our biological processes and mental functions are comparable to other living organisms? I intend to spend the next few minutes discussing the answers proposed by Friedrich Nietzsche to that question and how it applies to religion as well as you and me. I think it would be accurate, from my part, to assume that religion has touched every one of our lives in one way or another. Perhaps you are circumcised, baptized, or even celebrate a certain holiday in December. Religion is one concept that has closely followed humanity throughout its existence. 300,000 years ago, even primitive man was giving burial rites to the dead and forming the basis of ritualistic cults, and the upper Paleolithic era, 30 to 50,000 years ago, found the first anthropomorphic paintings and statuettes. While the dates are often disputed, give or take 10,000 years, the findings are concrete that religion predates the first human civilizations on Earth. What this shows is that even before we built houses, before we domesticated cows or wheat, and before we learned how to write, we were worshiping the supernatural and following spiritual leaders. Now, religion has changed greatly over the past few thousand years to where it is today. 35,000 years ago, the world population was an estimated 3 million individuals. The same number of people who live in Los Angeles, except they were spread across 6 different continents. There were no states, no countries, no churches. But as of 2012, with a world population of 7,021,836,029, 33.5% consider themselves Christian, 22.43% Muslim, 13.78% Hindu, and 7.13% Buddhist. And while the religious practices of ancient man can be occasionally observed on the French outskirts of human settlement, the general modes of worship have changed. However, I'm not here to preach to you history. My purpose is to discuss Nietzsche. He comes into the picture during the later half of the 19th century. Born as the son of a Lutheran Christian pastor, Nietzsche grew up with a religious background. But by the 1880s, his works of literature show to be highly critical of the commonly accepted philosophies of the time: Christianity, Kantianism, and utilitarianism. His most notable quote, "God is dead," which specifies the Abrahamic God, first appears in The Gay Science, published in 1882, and most notably in the work I'll discuss, Thus Spoke Zoroaster. But let us take a second here to analyze that short statement, God is dead. Does that make Nietzsche a simple atheist, a heretic, or a blasphemous scholar? Well, in many ways, yes. But if those words are scrutinized and their bare diction analyzed, a different conclusion may be reached. In stating that God is dead, it is implied that he was once alive, and that brings up the question of when was he alive, and when did he die? Nietzsche proposes that God was born of the human desire to seek purpose in life, even under the most terrible circumstances. It is important to remember that back in the early days of Christianity, most people lived short, mundane lives characterized by abusive rulers. It would be perhaps a major comfort to know that, or at least believe, that someone is there to save your soul and promise a better life. In return for this better life, God simply commands one not to kill, to be faithful to one's spouse, and to respect the property of others, etc., etc., etc. And with this adopted sense of purpose and salvation promised through religion, God delivered a cure to what Nietzsche called primal nihilism, or the acceptance of meaningless in life. God was born from mankind's suffering, but on the other hand, Nietzsche proposes that God died with the advent of modern science. Some of the hallmark beliefs of early Christians, the earth as the center of the universe, or the theory of creation, both of these concepts have been widely disproved by scientific evidence, and in the end, the secularization of modern governance and the continued advance of science would eventually hint at the dismissal of God and religion altogether. Then why must we ask, does religion still exist? What is it that it comes down all to this? That even up into the past century, the world is still full of the same suffering that has plagued mankind for the past thousands of years. People still kill each other for food. for water, over the color of their skin, and even for the clothes on their bodies. People still die, tragically, from excruciating diseases and from unknown ailments. And to remove religion from the picture, to discredit it all, would be a massive identity crisis for mankind. The entire framework of moralities and laws, the ideas of right and wrong, will be completely destroyed. Nietzsche argues that for this reason, man clings on to the ideas of God and religion, for otherwise there would be no purpose in living life. Take a second, please, and imagine a world in which you as an individual are alone in the universe and unprotected by the vast moralities and society that offends from the most heinous of criminals. However, there is a different life that Nietzsche sees for the future of all mankind, a human existence characterized by free thinking and self-determination among every individual. Nietzsche believed that the morals, the laws, and the same ethicalities similar to the Christian beliefs gave man a sense of purpose throughout his early existence. He argues, however, that many of these values are in fact obsolete, and that the God who has served humanity's God has been discredited through modern society. So here I will quote, "Thus spoke Zoroaster. I teach you the overman. Man is something that shall be overcome. But what have you done to overcome him? What is ape to man? Ape is a laughingstock or a painful embarrassment, and man shall be that to the overman, a laughingstock or a painful embarrassment." Nietzsche concludes that the overman is a free human, a free thinker and free will, and that the overman is the meaning of the earth. Man is a rope, tied between beasts and overman, a rope over an abyss. And what great in man is that he is a bridge and not an end. So standing over the proverbial abyss of failure, of darkness and despair, man has the potential to reach unprecedented greatness. But yet the looming possibility of regressing to the primal beast remains looming over mankind's future. So I ask you, when I conclude, that what will you do to overcome the ape? Thank you.
Thank you, David. Now Eric will speak about cyber warfare as the next threat to national security.
Hello everyone, my name is Eric and I hope you've enjoyed the event so far. I will be speaking about cyber warfare. Cyberspace has revolutionized the world economy and digitized daily life, but while doing so, it has made individuals, corporations, and nations vulnerable to a new kind of attack from an elusive and largely misunderstood adversary. Wars used to be conducted with swords, then firearms, and eventually nuclear weapons. But today's weapons consist of hackers, bots, and denial-of-service attacks. These enemies can be mild threats, similar to when North Korea shut down the Secret Service's site on the 4th of July of last year. But they can also be fatal, like shutting down radar during a bombing raid, as it suspected Israel did when its Air Force attacked North Korean nuclear facility in Syria 3 years ago. Cyber attacks are still considered something that happens in some intangible virtual world. Unlike a bomb, there is no hole in the ground and carnage to clean up afterward. But cyber war argues otherwise, laying out a very clear and present threat in a way that will likely generate much needed talk in policy circles. There is every reason to believe that most future dynamic wars will be accompanied by cyber war, and that other cyber wars will be conducted as standalone activities, without explosions, infantry, air power, and navies. And for those reasons, a full-scale cyber war will be unpredictable, and there is a good chance that battles like this will change the world military balance and fundamentally alter political and economic relations. Cyberspace isn't just the internet. It includes nearly all kinds of electronic exchanges of information, like stock market trades and credit card transactions, and more recently, everyday electronic devices have been created with the ability to link to the grid, even appliances you would never expect to be an issue. Let's take the photocopier, for example. Most people don't know that their copier could even be online, but many of them are, and they could inadvertently be creating holes for predators. Anyone from a competitor copier company to hackers can get in, disrupt, and wreak havoc. Hackers can set your copiers on fire, spark the sprinkler system, and cause a huge setback to your business. The origins of cyber war go back to 1991 during the Gulf War. It was the first real battle in the ages of information technology. Soon after, the Chinese began to think about cyber warfare as an asymmetric tactic for a lesser power to take on a bigger power. And by 2003, the Chinese had assembled a formal cyber warfare unit as part of their military. Likewise, several divisions of the US government have been working on their own variations of information warfare and cyber warfare for years. By 1995, military schools were training officers for cyber war. Another type of attack in cyber warfare is a DDoS, or Distributed Denial of Service. An attack like this is one of the most vicious in the means of cyber warfare today. And what effectively happens is a group of hackers create a virus to turn tens of thousands of unknowing computers into zombie-like machines. Then the hackers use those machines, which are known as botnets, to flood a website with a massive number of requests, overloading the system and shutting it down. At the same time as the North Korean 4th of July attack on our Secret Service, about 166,000 computers in 74 countries attacked banks and government sites in South Korea. South Korea quickly blamed North Korea, but the big problem with these DDoS attacks is that because they come from such a widely dispersed network, it is extremely difficult, if not impossible, to hold the criminal responsible. The biggest players in cyber warfare will probably be the US, Russia, and China. Israel and France will be close behind, and a cluster of about 24 other nations, including India, Pakistan, Iran, and South Korea, are scrambling to catch up. Though North Korea's secluded regime may be one of the least wired places in the world, Pyongyang, the capital of North Korea, commands 4 cyber warfare units, numbering upwards of 1,000 people who could be operating out of China, where it's easier to get online. Some people believe that the threat to cyber warfare is overstated, and that it's just being used to generate additional funding for the U.S. defense efforts or to give the U.S. government control over the internet. But it's real. This isn't a possible threat in our future, it's a threat now. In 2003, Titan Rain took place, which was a series of coordinated attacks on U.S. military computer systems. Access was gained through those computers to some of our most important networks, such as NASA and the Sandia National Laboratories. Even today, the purpose and identity of the attackers remains to be unclear, but the origin appears to be Chinese military. In 2007, Web War I took place in Estonia after Estonia relocated a famous Russian monument. A large set of denial service attacks took place on Estonia Parliament, banks, ministries, newspapers, and other websites, which severely hurt the institutions for about 3 weeks. Lastly, one of the scariest attacks was the Stuxnet worm, which is a Windows-based computer worm that spread through USB drives and network connections, which used stolen security certificates to infect the Iran nuclear facilities. It's unclear where this worm came from and the full extent of the damage, but the worm is still spreading through many other countries. So what do? We know that there are many entry points to the internet, and it's difficult to trace attacks. The internet was created for convenience, but we never thought of security. We also don't know the capabilities of other nations or groups, and to make it even worse, defenders have to be prepared to defend against many attacks, but attackers just have to find one opening in our system. Unfortunately, there aren't too many good suggestions for how to combat the threat of cyber terrorism. One of the first things to consider would be a limitation treaty to try and establish cooperation and ground rules among nations. This is similar to some of the Cold War treaties the US had with the Soviet Union during the 1970s. But given that this is a new threat, it seems necessary that we should start developing new strategies for defense. First, we need to diversify systems and networks by having many networks with multiple operating systems. We also need to increase the efforts on intrusion detection and prevention, because early detection may help us reduce the spread of malware and other negative effects. And we need to encourage international cooperation in addition to national efforts. Lastly, we need to isolate critical infrastructure such as power grids and telecommunication. No matter how we retaliate against cyber attacks, it's going to hurt. But if we don't start considering this as a serious threat to our national security, by the time we respond, it may be too late. Thank you all for listening, and I hope you enjoyed this presentation.
Thank you for watching our Global Policy Forum and for supporting Irvine Valley College Model United Nations.